Today's episode of RBR is brought to you by Squarespace. Expand your online presence through websites and much more. Man, AMG are doing a lot of SUVs these days, aren't they? And the 35 family is growing as well. So guys, welcome back to Remove Before Race. Today we've got a two-part review of this GLA 35. The first bit is going to be here in the UK, and the second bit I will go back to a Falterbach and we will continue it there. And today we are looking at the newest member of the 35 AMG family, and that is the lifestyle-orientated sporty SUV, as AMG put it, and that is, of course, the GLA 35. It follows in the footsteps of a very exciting A35, a pretty exciting CLA 35 as well, and a somewhat forgettable GLB 35. But in this review, we're going to look at what this car brings to the table and see where it sits in that compact 35 family versus all of its siblings. So without further ado, let us begin the GLA 35 4MATIC. So guys, we're nearing the release of the new RBR website and the new merchandise, all thanks to Squarespace. We finally got loads of articles up. We've also got the merchandise up finally, which you can all do within Squarespace. Super easy to do. We're starting off with a couple of t-shirt designs that you can see here. It was so easy to integrate into our Squarespace site, and that's going to launch soon. Once again, I love the ease of use. I love how we have our branding so easily applied to everything. Got a great offer for you guys as well. Go to squarespace.com/removebeforerace, use the code removebeforerace, and you'll get 10% off your first website or domain purchase. Support our sponsors, and back to the episode. So guys, when AMG first debuted this new 35 family of AMG cars, it seemed like more brand dilution, and there's definitely a case to be made for that. But when they debuted it, they did it in a car that was genuinely really exciting and fun to drive, because it brought so much of the full fat 45 AMGs of the previous generation back into a brand new niche, a new entry level area for customers to start climbing the AMG ladder to the car of their dreams. And that is the same for this GLA 35 as well. So that means this GLA 35 follows that same formula and pulls much of the great bits from the former GLA 45 into what is a cheaper and more accessible car. So for example, our previous GLA 45 had a 2-litre 4-cylinder engine that produced up to 380 brake horsepower with a 0 to 60 of 4.8 seconds. This new car still has a 2-litre 4-cylinder engine, but this one produces 306 brake horsepower, but a 0 to 60, which is only 0.2 seconds away of 5.1, which is pretty damn impressive. And as we've seen in the A35, thanks to the new 8-speed dual-clutch transmission, you haven't got the hesitation that the old GLA 45 had, and you'll have a car that is much quicker off the line and much more responsive, despite having less brake horsepower. It also has essentially the exact same size brakes. We've also got the exact same 4MATIC system with 50-50 power split, with 50% going to the rear or the front as needed. And an even bigger benefit for the GLA 35 is that it shares hardware with its GLA 45S big brother. So we've actually got the same suspension hardware as the GLA 45S, but in this one, it's all been reconfigured for more comfort versus the more sporting nature of the 45S. We've got AMG variable steering rack as well on here, which is similar to the one in the 45S. We've got an AMG exhaust system, but in this one, it's got an additional muffler, which if it's like in the GLB 35, it means that we're not going to get any pops and bangs out of it. Though we do have some of the reinforcement that we find in the 45S, for example, the aluminium shear panel and some braces on the front, but you don't get the braces on the rear or the same A-arms, etc., that make the 45S that much more sporting, as we saw in our full review. The other great benefit is the looks, because it shares the exact same body as the 45S. So if you're a 35 buyer, essentially you're getting the same body, because the only difference are the front lower air intakes, which are more open in the 45. Otherwise, you still get, for example, the AMG specific grille. You get the same front look, you get the same rear diffuser, even though you have the single pipes. With the pipes, I think they don't look as good as in the A35, where they're completely covered by the diffuser. These kind of hang off the bottom and look a little bit odd to my eyes. Though you still have a roof spoiler on the top, and generally the car looks a little bit more GLE and GLC than the previous car did. Though to my eyes, the previous car was that much more angular and exciting looking. This just looks a bit bulbous to me. But this all comes down to subjective taste. It does look really good in this Patagonia red finish, however. In terms of the design, of course, you've got the AMG grille. You've got really nice looking new headlights on the GLA. As we said, the entire front end looking like that 45S. I love the multi-spokes. They look really good. There's too much black plastic, as I said in the 45S review. Though in this red and black spec, it looks good. In other specs, it's just not going to look as good. One important note versus the previous GLA 45 is that this car is a whole 10 centimeters taller. It's wider as well, and it's actually 1 centimeter shorter, which means it fixes the old car's main problem of having just too less space in the rear and the boot, even versus the A-Class. So essentially what we've got here is a GLA 45 from the previous gen, but with many hand-me-downs from the new GLA 45S, much of the same hardware in terms of brakes, the engine, the general performance of the car. It's a really good deal versus the old car. But then the question is, where does this sit in the entire family of 35 AMGs? First, we have the A35, which is your go-to hatchback fun car. It's probably the most fun of the whole 35 series. It's a really exciting little hatchback. It's got great sound, as we found in our UK version as well. Then you have the CLA 35, which I'm a huge fan of because it's simply the best looking of the whole family. It gives you a lot of that CLS and GT four-door look, but in a car that, again, had as much oral pleasure in terms of all the sound and the pops and bangs that you get out of the car, but in a car that drove in a lot more grown-up way. The suspension was just better, and the daily application just simply better in the GLA. Then you've got the GLB, the complete other side of the story. This was interesting because it had 7 seats, but I didn't really like the look of it in terms of the design, which I'm going to retract now because I prefer it to the GLA. But the fact that it had 7 seats was a great boon. It's just a shame that it didn't have enough AMG sound. And then slotting in between GLB and CLA comes this GLA. Now, it's a bit smaller than the GLB. It's allegedly got the same exhaust system, so I think we can expect, again, less pops and bangs, which makes less sense to me because this is meant to be more sporty. Pretty much we'll see exactly the same performance and dynamism, I reckon, as the GLB. So I think it's got its work cut out to really convince me that it's worth having alongside the GLB, which, thanks to that 7-seat option and the unique styling, just gives it an almost justified place in the family, which I can't believe I'm saying. But to really see whether that's true or not, let's go and see what it's like inside and see what it's like on the road. And to do that, let's head back to the home of driving performance, AMG Affalterbach. Back at AMG to continue this review then, and I've suddenly got more hair again. So interior of GLA 35, Europe, you're lucky because you're going to get these AMG control switches, which are really easy to use when you're driving. For the UK, we won't have that as a differentiator to the 45S. Instead, you'll be using this area to control those options, or you can go into individual mode, set whatever you want, then it's just one click away of the dynamic select button. So it's not too much of a loss, to be honest. You also won't get the AMG performance seats that you see here. You'll probably get the standard ones, as is in the case with the rest of the 35s. With the 35 AMGs, you get AMG motion start, but without any pops and bangs. So don't expect anything exciting like the GLA 45S gives you in terms of startup. The rest is very similar to the GLB, particularly with the seating position. You're quite high, you see a lot of the dashboard, probably more than you want to see. For example, the heads-up display. It kind of gives you a feeling that you can't see enough of the road, and to see more, you have to go higher. But you don't want to go higher because you want to be lower in even an entry-level AMG. The GLB has some unique trims with chamfered edges that you don't get in the GLA, so that car has kept kind of its unique look, and this one has its own look as well. But generally, it's a copy-paste of that GLB interior, certainly in the front. Versus A-Class, it looks very different despite having the same center console. This entire area is so large and exaggerated that it truly feels like a very different car. That matched with the seating position. Of course, you get more space in the back, more headroom, more legroom, more boot room, etc., which is expected of GLA and wasn't really the case in the previous generation, was it? It was almost a downgrade in practicality from the A-Class, which is weird. That's not the case with this car. It is the more practical one if you're weighing it up against A-Class. We've got the Super Sport display with the 3 configurable areas on there to set to your liking, and you've even got some AMG performance media in here with the track pace and the dials, as you would find in the 45S as well. But the real question is, how does this car justify its existence when you've got cars like GLB 35, which have allegedly similar driving performance but more practicality, and you've got cars like A35 that are more dynamic and more sporty? So let's check that out right now on the road with this GLA 35. So here's an odd switch around, going from UK all the way back to a Falterbach to drive, again, a left-hand drive car. It's all so bizarre. Anyway, so here we are in familiar territory, as this is where I drove the CLA 35. Now this is very useful for me because I get to see both sides of the 35 family. One which is more geared towards comfort, and the other we saw was quite exciting, quite sporty, particularly with the great exhaust sound that the CLA 35 had. So first bit that I want to touch on is how big this car feels versus driving the 35 on the same road. At the moment, I feel like I'm driving in the middle of the road versus the CLA, which was quite small, svelte. I don't think the higher up driving position helps. I don't think the size of like the dashboard here in front that we discussed earlier either really helps that much. So these are these small but big differences that I'm seeing immediately. Now, as we said, this car is indeed quite close to the old GLA 45. Pretty reminiscent, if my memory serves, of what the old GLA 45 was like speed-wise, though none of that character, and I'll get onto sound later. But if I'm honest, the gearbox and the way that the engine responds very quickly is much better than that old car. You don't have that initial hesitation that the old 45 used to have when setting off. It's a lot sharper, it's a lot quicker off the line. So certainly in terms of the 4MATIC, the speed, and the general hardware there, very similar to that old car. Sound is nothing like the old GLA 45, is it? I mean, the CLA 35 had some lovely pops and bangs. The old GLA 45, huge bangs and great sound coming out of that car. This, like the GLB, because of that muffler in the middle, there's nothing. I mean, I'm in Sport Plus. I'll give it as many let-offs the throttle as you want, as many downshifts as you want. There is no pops and bangs at all coming out of this car. It's a real shame because there's an AMG that kills so much of the experience, and as we saw in the GLA 45S, that car sounds brilliant, and it doesn't have that muffler. Well, comparatively brilliant, I suppose, as much as a car these days can sound. I really like the mix of the engine and the gearbox though, and the suspension is very good as well. I'll get onto the comfort element of it later, but in terms of like the handling and stuff, you can see how similar, or in fact the hardware is essentially identical to the GLA 45S. It's just the elastic kinematics and the tuning are specifically for the 35 to make it a little bit more comfortable. But as we saw, that car so much more rapid, so much more emotion in it, really setting the two cars apart, which I think is very important because that car just doesn't look different enough anyway. Of course, you get a launch start option in these cars. You get it in every AMG now, so. Should you want it in your GLA 35, it's there. Now, in terms of handling, again, much of the characteristic I feel of the previous car, it's quite skittish. I mean, it's very wet out today. We've got Continental tyres as well, which, let's just say I'm not going to be pushing this too hard. It feels a little bit understeery. It's really hard not to start to make comparisons to A35, which is, you know, it's got good space in that car as well in terms of practicality, but you know, that car is so much more nippy, it's so much more agile, whereas this, I don't know whether it's the driving position, which I just can't get low enough. It's just much more of a chore to drive faster and faster. And then you make the inevitable comparisons to something like Macan, which you have to because of the price, even though perhaps it sits a level higher, and you know, the story doesn't get any better. That being said, what is very good is the steering response, as always. 35 AMGs sharing much of the same hardware, and thus you get really nice turn in, really nice feedback coming through the steering wheel. Some great systems at play here. I love the fact that AMG don't shortchange their entry-level cars in regards to simple things like steering. It's so important. And of course, AMGs, you're expecting sound and emotion. As we said, there's a nice rev build-up and a bit of a blurp when you gear shift upwards, but there's no pops and bangs, sadly. It's a real shame. I think where it sounds best is probably setting off from a standstill. You get a nice rev, which is quite meaty. Some good gear shifts as well. Sounds pretty okay. But when you compare it to the other 35s, because of that muffler, and to the 45S, just not as exciting. But if you don't care for the pops and bangs, then you get a similar sound. Now, if we knock it back into comfort mode for a minute, calm the gearbox down. One thing that is quite noticeable is how much more this car is attuned for comfort versus the 45S. Whereas in that car, you would feel pretty much every bump on the road, even in these great German roads. It's a little bit reduced on this. I won't say massively. I think you're still going to judder around a little bit because the size of the wheels are so big. But the breadth of ability is much more towards the comfort side, which is what the engineers planned for. And you do feel that when you're in comfort mode, it just glides along a lot easier than the 45. And it's certainly a big upgrade over the old GLA if we go back to previous generation. Seat position, as I said, it's very, very SUV. I think there's just too much dashboard ahead. I'm seeing too much of the heads-up display area as well. Feels like the bonnet is a million miles away. And I'm not sure kind of where my car starts and finishes, which is pretty much like most SUVs, really. And that's what they've given you in this car. You do have that kind of commanding SUV position. So if that's what you're looking for, this isn't going to treat you like an A-Class in that sense. This very much is sitting higher up. So in conclusion, I can see the merits of this car, but I also kind of struggle with it because I understand how the 45S really works for the USA. I understand how it works as a more practical, larger A45S. With this one, I think you'd really need to have a bugbear about practicality to take it over the really fun A35. And if you really wanted that, I would kind of push you over onto the 45S. Or my choice, if you wanted AMG flavor, would be to go to the previous gen GLA 45, get all that lovely exhaust sound. Yes, you've got not the brilliant MBUX, but if, again, you're looking for the AMG flavor, to me, that is the car to go for. Or indeed, I mean, the GLC is a brilliant car in a pretty similar price bracket as well. And then even again, if you like the way that this car sounds and handles, I would say go for the GLB 35. I can't believe I'm saying that because I've never really been an advocate of the GLB 35. If anything, it's been the butt of a lot of jokes for me. But I kind of understand that car now. It's got a completely different design, which looks a lot better than this in my opinion. You've got the option of 7 seats, and you've got pretty much the same handling and dynamics as this car. To me, that one just makes a lot more sense. There's nothing particularly wrong with this GLA 35, but equally, there's nothing particularly that stands out compared to the multitude of other 35 AMGs that we have. So guys, I hope you found this review of the GLA 35 useful. If you did, please do like, subscribe, hit the bell icon, and I'll see you guys next time.